since you're finally moving out, Eleanor, I thought you deserved a housewarming gift, my daughter-in-law said, and the whole dining room went quiet in that awful way people get quiet when they already know the joke is cruel but want to hear it anyway. Madison placed a small white box in front of me, tied with a silver ribbon, the kind of ribbon she saved from expensive department stores and reused when she wanted something cheap to look thoughtful. I looked at the box, then at my son Andrew, who sat beside her with his hands folded around a glass of iced tea he had not touched. He would not look at me. That told me more than the box did. The table was set for 8 in the house where I had lived for 36 years, the house my late husband Charles and I painted ourselves one July when the Ohio heat was so thick we had to keep pitchers of lemonade in the garage. The same oak table had held birthday cakes, Thanksgiving turkeys, school permission slips, hospital bills, and the quiet prayers Charles whispered before every meal. Now it held a farewell dinner for me, planned by the woman who had spent 3 weeks calling my leaving a transition. Not an eviction. Not a family failure. A transition. Madison smiled at the relatives she had invited, her blonde hair curled neatly against her shoulders, her cream sweater spotless, her wedding ring flashing each time she moved her hand. She looked like a woman hosting a celebration, not one pushing a 68-year-old widow out of her own home. "Go on," she said softly. "Open it." I picked it out myself. I could feel everyone watching. Andrew's cousin Marlene lifted her fork and set it back down without taking a bite. His Uncle Ray cleared his throat. No one said my name. That was how these things worked. Cruelty became acceptable when everyone pretended it was only awkward. I pulled the ribbon loose. My fingers were steady, which seemed to disappoint Madison a little. Inside the box was a plastic keychain shaped like a tiny blue house, the kind sold near checkout counters for a few dollars. A cheerful yellow door was painted on the front. The paint had already chipped at one corner. For a moment, I simply looked at it. Then Madison laughed. Not loudly. She was too polished for that. Just enough to let the room know they had permission to join her. "At least now you'll have a home somewhere," she said. A few people gave nervous little laughs. Andrew stared harder at his glass. My son, the boy who once cried when a neighbor stepped on my tulips, sat 6 feet from me and allowed his wife to turn my life into a punchline. I closed my hand around the keychain. Its plastic edges pressed into my palm. I thought of Charles, of his old work boots by the back door, of the way he used to say, "Ellie, a home is not the walls. It is who protects you inside them." I wondered what he would have done if he had been sitting at that table. Then I remembered that Charles was not there. I was. So I smiled. Not because it was funny. Not because I forgave her. I smiled because Madison had mistaken silence for weakness, and that was the kind of mistake proud people make right before the floor shifts beneath them. "Thank you," I said, placing the little keychain beside my plate. My voice sounded calm, almost gentle. Madison's smile widened, satisfied, as if she had won something. "I knew you'd appreciate it," she said. "New beginnings can be hard at your age, but we're all trying to make this easier." At your age. She let those words settle like dust on good furniture. I folded my napkin once, then twice, smoothing the corner with my thumb. In my purse, tucked behind my reading glasses and a folded grocery list, was a large manila envelope from Helen Parker's law office. Madison had no idea it was there. Andrew had no idea either. They thought the only gift at that table was the cheap little house she had given me to humiliate me. They did not know I had brought one of my own. 3 weeks before that dinner, Madison had started removing me from the house one small decision at a time. It began with the hallway table. Charles had built it in his workshop the year Andrew turned 12, sanding the edges by hand because he said a home should not have sharp corners where children run. I kept a brass lamp on it, a bowl for keys, and a framed photograph from our 25th anniversary in Myrtle Beach. One morning, I came downstairs and found the table gone. In its place stood a narrow white console Madison had ordered online, with a glass vase full of artificial branches and a little wooden sign that said blessed. My photograph was not there. "Where is the hallway table?" I asked. Madison was standing in the kitchen, pouring almond milk into coffee she had brought from town, even though my coffee pot was full. She did not turn around right away. "Andrew put it in the garage," she said. It was making the entryway look dated. Dated. That was the first word she used when she meant mine. The next day, the Wi-Fi password changed. Then the cable account. Then the electric bill, which had always come addressed to Charles and me, arrived under Andrew's name only. Each change came with a soft explanation. It was easier this way. It was more practical. It was less stressful for me. That was Madison's gift. She could take something from you while sounding like she was saving you from carrying it. After Charles passed, I expected the house to feel empty. I expected silence at breakfast and the ache of reaching across the bed for a hand that was no longer there. I expected grief to sit beside me in the evenings when the porch light came on by itself and no one said, "Ellie, did you lock the back door?" What I did not expect was to feel like a guest in rooms where I had washed baseboards, rocked a feverish child, balanced checkbooks, and held my husband's hand through his last winter. Madison never raised her voice. That made it worse. She would step into a room with her careful smile and say things like, "Eleanor, I moved your sweaters to the downstairs closet so the upstairs room can breathe," or, "I boxed up some of Charles's old papers because looking at them every day cannot be healthy." She always said my name the way nurses speak to difficult patients on television. Calm. Polite. Final. Andrew followed behind her with cardboard boxes and quiet eyes. Once, I found him in the primary bedroom, holding one of Charles's flannel shirts. His thumb moved over the cuff where the fabric had worn thin. For 1 second, I saw my son again. Not Madison's husband. Not the man who avoided every hard conversation. My son. "Andrew," I said gently. He looked up, and his face folded with something like shame. Before he could speak, Madison appeared in the doorway. "Honey, we talked about this," she said. Just 5 words. That was all it took. He lowered the shirt into the box. I understood then that I was not only losing my place in the house. I was losing the language between my son and me. Madison called it downsizing. She printed articles about senior apartments and left them beside my teacup. She circled places with elevators, community rooms, and shuttle services to grocery stores. "You would make friends," she told me one afternoon while measuring the dining room windows for new curtains. "Women your age need structure. Women your age." She said it as if age were a stain that had finally spread too far to ignore. I looked at the tape measure stretched across the window where Charles once hung Christmas lights from the inside because the snow had come early. "I already have structure," I said. "This house is my structure." Madison smiled without warmth. "A house this size is too much for one person." I turned toward Andrew, who was sitting at the table scrolling through his phone. "Do you think that too?" He did not answer right away. That pause was a door closing. "Mom," he said at last, "we are just trying to be realistic." Realistic. Another word people use when they want their selfishness to sound mature. I nodded, because by then I had learned something important. When people decide you are weak, they stop listening to what you say. So I stopped trying to convince them. I began watching instead. By the time Madison began speaking for Andrew, she had become careful enough to make it look natural. She did not interrupt him loudly. She did not correct him in front of people with the sharpness other wives might use. Madison only touched his wrist, tilted her head, or said, "What Andrew means is," and somehow his sentence would end in her mouth instead of his. I noticed it first during a Sunday lunch 2 weeks after Charles's memorial service. I had made chicken and dumplings because Andrew used to ask for them every time he came home from college. He took one bite, smiled faintly, and said, "This tastes like when I was a kid." For one small second, the kitchen warmed. Then Madison set down her spoon. "Comfort food is sweet," she said, "but we really need to start thinking about healthier routines for everyone." Everyone meant me. Andrew lowered his eyes to his bowl. I watched the smile leave his face as quietly as steam leaving soup. Later that afternoon, he found me on the back porch, where the maple tree shaded half the steps and Charles's old wind chimes moved in the breeze. "Mom," he began, then stopped. His hands were in his pockets. He looked tired, older than 41. "You can tell me," I said. "I am still your mother." He swallowed. "Madison thinks it might be better if we put a timeline on the move." There it was. Not Madison and I, Madison thinks. He looked embarrassed by the words, but he still used them. "A timeline," I repeated. "For me to leave my home." "It is not like that." "Then what is it like?" He looked toward the kitchen window. Madison was inside, wiping a counter that was already clean. She was not watching us directly, but she did not need to. Andrew had learned to feel her attention even when her back was turned. "The house is a lot," he said. "The taxes, the repairs, the yard. Dad handled so much of it." "Your father handled what I did not handle," I said. "And I handled what he did not. That is called marriage." Andrew flinched a little, as if the word hurt him. I regretted that for half a second. Then I remembered the boxes in the garage with my name written on them in Madison's handwriting. Not Eleanor. Not Mom. Just E. Whitaker, black marker, block letters, as if I were inventory. Madison stepped onto the porch before Andrew could answer. "There you two are," she said brightly. I did not want to interrupt. She always interrupted by announcing that she was not interrupting. "We were just talking," I said. "Good," she replied. "Talking is healthy. And Eleanor, I know this feels emotional, but Andrew and I are trying to protect you from making decisions out of grief." Protect. That was another word she liked. Protect meant control. Help meant remove. Practical meant selfish. She sat down beside Andrew, close enough that their shoulders touched. "Your generation sees houses differently," she continued. "You hold on to things until they become burdens. We are trying to build a future, and this house could finally become useful again." Useful again. I looked past her into the yard, where Charles had planted hydrangeas after I mentioned liking them in a magazine. They had bloomed every summer for 29 years. Useful. As if love had to earn its keep. "What future are you building here?" I asked. Madison's eyes flickered. "Just once." Andrew answered too quickly. "We have talked about renovating. For yourselves." He rubbed his jaw. "Maybe eventually. Nothing is decided." Madison smiled at him, pleased and warning at the same time. "We only mean that the space should not go to waste," she said. "A family home should serve the family." I wanted to ask when I had stopped being family. The question rose to my tongue and stayed there, heavy and useless. Because I already knew the answer. I had stopped being family when Charles stopped standing between me and their ambition. That evening, after they left, I walked through the house without turning on many lights. The living room smelled faintly of lemon cleaner Madison had used on shelves she had no right to empty. The den felt strange without Charles's fishing magazines stacked beside his chair. In the bedroom, my dresser drawers had been rearranged. Socks where scarves belonged. Letters moved from the top drawer to the bottom. Small things. Intimate things. The kind of trespass that does not leave a bruise but changes the air in a room. I sat on the edge of the bed and opened the nightstand on Charles's side. His reading glasses were still there, folded neatly beside a roll of peppermint candies and the silver pocket watch his father had given him. I picked it up, not because I expected anything. only because I missed the weight of something that had belonged to him. The watch had stopped at 6:17. I pressed the latch. The lid sprang open. Inside, behind the faded photograph of me at 32, was a tiny brass key taped to the back with a yellowing strip of paper. My name was written on it in Charles's hand. Ellie. Just 5 letters, but my whole body went still. For the first time in weeks, the house did not feel empty. It felt like it was holding its breath with me. The key was so small it looked almost ceremonial, the kind that belonged to a music box or an old desk drawer, not something important enough for Charles to hide behind my photograph. I sat there for a long time with the pocket watch open in my palm, listening to the quiet house breathe around me. Downstairs, the refrigerator hummed. Somewhere in the walls, the pipes gave a soft knock as the evening temperature dropped. Ordinary sounds. Married sounds. The sounds I had once ignored because Charles had always been there to hear them with me. I turned the key over and saw a number etched into the brass. 214, nothing else. No label. No note except my name in his familiar handwriting. Ellie. Charles had called me that from the week we met at a county fair outside Dayton, when I was 29 and pretending not to notice the tall man in the blue work shirt who kept finding reasons to walk past the pie booth. He said Eleanor sounded like someone who owned a library, and Ellie sounded like someone who laughed before the punchline. I had not heard that name from anyone since the funeral. Madison called me Eleanor. Andrew called me Mom, but lately it sounded borrowed. Ellie belonged to Charles. I carried the key downstairs and searched his old roll-top desk in the den. Madison had not gotten to it yet, probably because the desk was heavy and unfashionable. She had placed a sticky note on top that read donate, as if 36 years of birthday cards, tax receipts, fishing licenses, and handwritten recipes could be dismissed with 6 letters. I pulled out the drawers slowly, testing the little key in each lock. The first 2 did not fit. The third was stuck and smelled faintly of cedar. The fourth, a narrow drawer hidden behind the center panel, opened with a small click that made my heart beat hard against my ribs. Inside was a flat metal box no larger than a shoebox. I knew it immediately. Charles used to keep savings bonds in it when Andrew was young. I had not seen it in years. My hands did not tremble until I lifted the lid. There was no money inside. No jewelry. No dramatic treasure wrapped in velvet. Just a yellow legal envelope, a set of keys on a plain ring, and a letter folded twice with my name written across the front. Ellie, in case I do not get the chance to explain. I sat at the desk because my knees had gone weak. The chair creaked under me, the same sound it made whenever Charles leaned back to think. For a moment I almost expected to smell his aftershave or hear him say, "Now do not get mad until you read the whole thing." I opened the letter carefully. His handwriting was slower than it used to be, the letters a little uneven, and that alone hurt more than I expected. My dear Ellie, if you are reading this, then I probably left you sooner than I promised. I am sorry for that. I know you will tell me I should not apologize for something I could not control, but I am apologizing anyway because husbands are allowed to be unreasonable in writing. I stopped and pressed the page against my chest. Not for long. Just long enough to keep breathing. Then I read on. There are things I did not tell you because I wanted them finished before I made you dream about them. A few years ago, I bought a small house near Lakeview, Michigan. Nothing fancy. 2 bedrooms, a screened porch, a view of the water if you stand near the kitchen window and look past the cottonwoods. You always said you wanted somewhere quiet, somewhere with cardinals in the morning and no one asking you where the good scissors went. I wanted that for you. I wanted you to have a place that was yours, not because I gave it to you, but because you earned every board in it by standing beside me all these years. My eyes blurred, but I kept going. The deed paperwork should be with Helen Parker. I was waiting to transfer the final documents into the trust we discussed. If I failed to finish it, take this letter to Helen. She will know what to do. And Ellie, listen to me carefully. You should never have to ask our son for a roof. I read that sentence 3 times. You should never have to ask our son for a roof. The words did not comfort me at first. They broke something open. Charles had seen more than I thought. Maybe not all of it. Maybe not Madison measuring curtains before grief had even left the hallway. But enough. Enough to know that love without protection could become a locked door. I took the keys from the metal box and held them in my palm beside Madison's cheap plastic keychain, which I had carried upstairs without realizing it. One was a joke meant to shrink me. The other was a promise meant to steady me. They looked nothing alike. The next morning, I called Helen Parker's office from the kitchen before Madison and Andrew arrived to sort through more of my life. Helen had been Charles's attorney for nearly 20 years, a woman with silver glasses, careful suits, and a voice that never wasted emotion. When her assistant put me through, I said only, "Helen, this is Eleanor Whitaker." I found Charles's letter. There was a silence on the line. Then Helen exhaled softly. "I wondered when you would." Helen Parker's office was on the 2nd floor of a brick building in downtown Westerville, above a bakery that smelled like cinnamon even at 10 in the morning. I arrived 20 minutes early because Charles had raised me into the habit of respecting other people's time, and because sitting in my own kitchen while Madison labeled more boxes would have felt like watching someone erase my name in slow motion. Helen greeted me herself. She was in her early 70s, neat as a tax form, with silver hair cut just below her chin and a navy suit that made her look like she had never misplaced a document in her life. "Eleanor," she said, taking both of my hands. Not Ellie. Not because she was cold, but because she knew which names belonged to which rooms. I am sorry it had to come to this. I wanted to ask what she meant, but the answer was already sitting behind her eyes. She led me into a conference room with a polished table, 2 leather chairs, and a framed map of Franklin County on the wall. I placed Charles's letter, the brass key, and the ring of house keys in front of her. Helen did not look surprised. She opened a file cabinet and removed a folder thick enough to hold more history than paper. "Charles purchased the Lakeview property 4 years ago," she said. "A small house on a little over half an acre, about 3 miles from the public marina. He paid for it outright." Paid for it outright. The words landed quietly, but they changed the shape of the room. For weeks, Madison had spoken as if I were one unpaid bill away from becoming a problem Andrew had to solve. All that time, Charles had left me a door. Helen slid a copy of the deed across the table. My husband's signature sat at the bottom, strong and dark. I touched it with one finger. "Why did he not tell me?" I asked. "Because he wanted repairs finished first," Helen said. "New roof, updated furnace, safer porch steps." He was arranging the final transfer into a living trust when his heart condition worsened. He asked me to prepare instructions in case he could not complete it himself. She paused, choosing her next words carefully. He was also worried about pressure. I looked up. "From whom?" Helen folded her hands. "At the time, he did not name anyone directly. But he said he wanted your right to live there protected, no matter what decisions Andrew might make later." I felt my throat tighten, not with surprise, but with the terrible relief of being understood by someone who was gone. Did he know Madison would try to push me out? Helen's eyes softened. He knew people change when property is involved. That was a kind way to say what I had been afraid to say aloud. She opened another document. "There is something else you should know. 2 months before Charles passed, Madison called this office." The room seemed to still. Outside the window, a delivery truck backed up near the bakery, its warning beep distant and ordinary. "Madison called you." She asked whether widow occupancy rights could be challenged if a surviving spouse was considered unable to maintain a property. Helen's mouth tightened slightly. She also asked whether an untransferred secondary property could be absorbed into the main estate if the surviving spouse did not claim it promptly. I sat very still. Madison had not simply noticed an opportunity after Charles died. She had been looking for one before the house had even finished mourning him. Did Andrew know? I asked. Helen hesitated. That hesitation was its own answer. Andrew's name was mentioned, but he was not on the call. I pictured my son standing in doorways, letting Madison speak, letting her measure windows, letting her turn my future into a project. Maybe he had not planned the cruelty. Maybe he had only permitted it. I was learning there were different kinds of betrayal, and some wore softer shoes. Helen turned the papers toward me. Charles left enough authority for you to complete the trust now. The Lakeview house can be placed under your control with lifetime occupancy rights. No sale. No mortgage. No transfer without your written consent. If anyone attempts to pressure you out of it, their future interest can be suspended. I looked at the legal language. It was dry, precise, almost dull. Yet it felt warmer than anything said at my dining table in weeks. Can Madison touch it? I asked. Helen's answer came without hesitation. Not unless you hand her the pen. I almost laughed then. Not because it was funny, but because for the first time since Charles's funeral, I felt the floor beneath me. Solid. Mine. Helen gave me a pen and pointed to the signature line. My hand moved slowly, but it did not shake. Eleanor Whitaker. Not E. Whitaker on a cardboard box. Not a burden. Not a transition. My full name. When I finished, Helen gathered the papers and placed a sealed manila envelope in front of me. You may want to keep this somewhere safe, she said. I slid it into my purse beside the plastic keychain Madison had given me. One was meant to mock me. One was meant to protect me. By the time I drove home, Madison's car was in my driveway, and the porch light was on though the sun had not set. Through the front window, I could see her moving around my living room with a roll of tape in her hand. She looked busy. Confident. Almost happy. I sat in the car for a moment, my hands resting on the steering wheel, and understood something Charles must have known before I did. People who think they have taken everything rarely check what you are carrying when you walk back in. I walked into my own house as if nothing had changed, because that is how you learn what people believe they have gotten away with. Madison was in the living room, sealing a box labeled Kitchen Overflow, though it was full of my wedding serving plates. The blue willow set Charles bought me one Christmas when money was tight and he worked overtime for 6 Saturdays without telling me why. She looked up when I came in, her smile bright and practiced. There you are, Eleanor. I was starting to worry. She was not worried. Worried people do not pack another woman's dishes in newspaper without asking. Andrew stood near the fireplace with his sleeves rolled up, holding a framed photograph of Charles and me at Niagara Falls. He had the guilty look of a child caught touching something fragile. Mom, he said, we thought we would help while you were out. Help. I set my purse on the hallway table Madison had not yet replaced in her mind, though the real one was still in the garage. That was thoughtful, I said. Madison watched my face, searching for anger. I gave her none. Anger would have told her where I was tender. Silence made her guess. She turned back to the box. I hope you do not mind, but I started sorting items by what you will realistically need. Senior apartments do not have much storage. I am sure they do not, I said. Andrew glanced at me, surprised by my calm. Madison heard it too. Her hands slowed. Have you looked at the brochures I left? She asked. A few. And they were very organized. She smiled, thinking that was agreement. Good. I knew once you had time to process everything, you would understand. This transition can be peaceful if we all cooperate. I took off my coat and hung it in the closet, exactly where I had hung coats since the year Andrew started kindergarten. Madison, I said, I have been thinking about what you said. About new beginnings. Her eyes sharpened with interest. Really? Yes. And I believe you deserve one too. Andrew looked from her to me. What does that mean? I folded my gloves and placed them on the shelf. It means I have a moving gift for Madison. For the first time in weeks, Madison looked truly surprised. Not suspicious yet. Just delighted in that quick, greedy way people reveal before they cover themselves. For me, she asked. For you and Andrew, in a sense. That was true enough to say plainly. Madison's whole manner softened. She stepped away from the box and came closer, as if I had suddenly become useful again. Eleanor, that is very generous. You really do not have to do that. When someone says you do not have to while leaning forward to hear more, they have already accepted. I would like to, I said. But not today. I think it should be at dinner, with everyone present. After all, you have worked so hard to make this move feel like a family occasion. She liked that. I saw it land. A family occasion meant attention. Attention was Madison's natural climate. That is actually a lovely idea, she said. We could do a small farewell dinner this Friday. Nothing too sad. Just a positive send-off. A positive send-off, I repeated. Andrew frowned. Mom, are you sure? Poor Andrew. He still knew me well enough to feel something shift, but not well enough to stand beside it. I am sure, I said. Madison was already planning. I could see the list forming behind her eyes, Marlene, Ray, maybe the Hendersons from next door, because she liked witnesses when she felt in control. I will handle the food, she said. No, I replied gently. Let me cook. One last meal in this kitchen. That pleased her even more. A sentimental old woman cooking her own farewell dinner. It fit the role Madison had written for me. She reached for my hand and patted it once. Her palm was cool and dry. That is sweet, Eleanor. Truly. I looked at her hand on mine and thought of Helen Parker's conference table, of my signature drying in blue ink, of Charles's words folded safely inside my purse. I want it done properly, I said. So do I, Madison answered. She had no idea we meant two different things. The next 2 days, I behaved exactly as they expected. I wrapped dishes. I labeled boxes. I let Madison tell me which furniture would overwhelm a smaller place. I let Andrew carry Charles's winter coats to the basement without asking why he could not bear to meet my eyes. Each time Madison made a suggestion, I nodded. Each time she called my leaving healthy, I smiled. At night, I sat at the kitchen table with a cup of tea and wrote a simple list of what I would take to Lakeview: Charles's pocket watch, our wedding album, the blue willow plates, the quilt my mother made, and the brass lamp from the hallway table. Not much. Enough. On Friday afternoon, I cooked slowly. Pot roast, mashed potatoes, green beans with almonds, peach cobbler cooling near the window. The house filled with the kind of smell that makes people confuse comfort with forgiveness. By 6 o'clock, Madison had set out candles and put on pearl earrings. Andrew wore the gray sweater I gave him last Christmas. Guests began arriving with polite smiles and empty hands. The stage was ready because Madison had built it herself. All I had to do was let her stand in the center of it. By 7 o'clock, every chair at the dining room table was filled except Charles's. Madison had removed his chair earlier that week, saying an empty seat made the room feel depressing, but I had carried it back from the corner of the den before anyone arrived. I did not explain. I simply placed it where it belonged, at the head of the table, and watched Madison notice it the moment she walked in with a pitcher of iced tea. Her smile tightened, but guests were already present, so she said nothing. That was the useful thing about witnesses. They forced her manners to stay polished. Marlene sat to my left, wearing too much perfume and the expression of someone who had come expecting discomfort but not responsibility. Uncle Ray talked about the weather in Cincinnati. The Hendersons from next door complimented the roast 3 times because they did not know where else to put their eyes. Andrew sat across from me, moving food around his plate. Madison sat beside him, glowing under the chandelier she had chosen to replace the brass fixture Charles loved. She had arranged the evening like a magazine photograph. White candles. Linen napkins. A little vase of pale roses. Everything soft, everything tasteful, everything designed to make my removal look gentle. Halfway through dinner, Madison lifted her glass. "I just want to say something," she began. Of course she did. The room settled. Forks lowered. Andrew's shoulders rose slightly, as if bracing for weather. Madison looked at me with the kind of tenderness people use when they want applause for being patient. "Eleanor has been part of this home for a very long time," she said. "Part of this home. Not owner. Not mother. Not widow. Part, like a curtain rod or a side table. And transitions are never easy, especially after a loss. But Andrew and I believe this next chapter will be healthier for everyone." Everyone. There it was again, the word that erased me while pretending to include me. She continued, "We are proud of her for being open to change." I looked at Andrew then. Just once. His face turned red, and he stared down at his napkin. My son had not poured the humiliation, but he had set out the glass. Madison reached beneath her chair and brought out a small white box tied with a silver ribbon. I recognized it before she set it in front of me. The little performance from the beginning of the night had arrived right on schedule. "And because new beginnings deserve a little joy," she said, "I got you something." The Hendersons smiled politely. Marlene leaned forward. Ray took a sip of water and looked immediately sorry he had come. I untied the ribbon. I lifted the lid. The plastic Blue House keychain lay there, bright and cheap against the tissue paper. Madison laughed softly, inviting the others to understand. "It is just a silly little thing," she said. "But I thought it was perfect. At least you will always have a house in your pocket." No one laughed loudly. That almost made it worse. A cruel joke dies quickly when people reject it. This one lingered because they allowed it to breathe. I picked up the keychain and held it between my thumb and forefinger. It weighed almost nothing. That seemed fitting. "Thank you," I said. Madison blinked, waiting for tears or anger, some visible proof that her words had reached the place she aimed for. I gave her neither. I set the keychain beside my plate and took a drink of water. The room became uncomfortable in a different way. People do not know what to do when the person being embarrassed refuses to perform the pain for them. Madison recovered first. "You are welcome," she said, though her voice had lost a little shine. Dessert came next. I served peach cobbler warm with vanilla ice cream, the way Charles liked it, and listened as everyone praised the crust. I wondered if any of them noticed that no one had asked where I was going. Not Marlene, who had borrowed money from Charles twice and never paid it back. Not Ray, who used to bring Andrew fishing on Saturdays. Not the Hendersons, who had eaten my casseroles after Mrs. Henderson's knee surgery. They spoke of weather, property taxes, grocery prices, church parking, everything except the obvious fact that a widow was being packed out of her life after dessert. Madison loved that silence. She mistook it for agreement. When the plates were cleared, she dabbed her mouth with her napkin and turned to me. "Eleanor, you mentioned you had something for us too." Her voice was light, but her eyes were eager. Andrew looked sharply at her, then at me. He had forgotten. Madison had not. Greed has a better memory than guilt. I reached down and lifted my purse onto my lap. The manila envelope was inside, smooth and firm against my fingers. For one moment, I let my hand rest on it. I thought of Charles at his desk, writing my name. I thought of Helen Parker sliding the documents toward me. I thought of Madison standing in my living room with tape in her hand, boxing up a woman who was still breathing. Then I pulled out the envelope and placed it on the table in front of Madison. "Yes," I said. "I brought your gift." Madison looked at the envelope the way a person looks at a wrapped present they have already spent in their imagination. She touched the corner of it with 2 fingers, then glanced around the table with a small laugh meant to seem humble. "Eleanor, really, you did not have to make a production out of this." "I know," I said. "But you wanted everyone here." That quieted her for half a second. Andrew sat straighter. Marlene lowered her coffee cup without drinking. The room seemed to lean toward the envelope. Madison slid one finger beneath the flap and opened it carefully, perhaps expecting a check, perhaps expecting an old family necklace, perhaps expecting some final piece of Charles she could display and call generous. She pulled out the first page. Her smile stayed in place for 3 lines. Then it stopped, belonging to her face. Her eyes moved back to the top of the document, then down again, slower this time. Color drained from her cheeks in such a delicate way that, if I had still been the woman she thought I was, I might have asked if she needed water. "What is this?" she asked. Her voice was thin. "It is the paperwork for the Lakeview house," I said. The name landed heavily. Andrew turned toward her. "Lakeview." Madison did not answer him. She kept reading. That told me she already knew enough to be afraid. Uncle Ray frowned. "What house?" I placed my folded hands on the table. "A small property in Michigan that Charles purchased before he passed. 2 bedrooms, half an acre, and a porch that apparently needs painting." My voice did not rise. It did not need to. Madison flipped to the next page, and this time her polished calm cracked in front of everyone. "This is in a trust." "Yes." "With lifetime occupancy rights." "Yes." Andrew reached for the document. "Madison, let me see." She held it away from him by instinct, then seemed to realize how that looked and handed it over. He read quickly at first, then more slowly, his brow tightening. "Mom," he said, "Dad bought you a house." That question hurt more than I expected. Not because of the house. Because he sounded stunned that his father would protect me. "Your father bought a place where I would never have to ask permission to live," I said. Andrew looked down again. There are some truths a son should not have to hear at a dining table. There are also some truths he should have understood before dessert. Madison's fingers pressed flat against the tablecloth. "This says any sale, loan, transfer, or occupancy change requires your written consent." "That is correct." "And if someone attempts to pressure you to leave or interfere with your residence, Andrew's future interest can be suspended." She said it quietly, but not quietly enough. Marlene's mouth opened. Ray stared at Andrew. Mrs. Henderson suddenly found great interest in the pattern of her napkin. Andrew looked at Madison as if a curtain had moved and shown him a room he had been pretending was not there. "Why would Dad put that in?" he asked. Madison answered too quickly. "Lawyers put all kinds of dramatic language in documents." Helen Parker would have disliked that sentence. I almost smiled. "Helen drafted it because Charles requested protection." "Protection from what?" Andrew asked. No one moved. That was the moment Madison had not planned for. She had prepared for my tears, my gratitude, my confusion, maybe even my anger. She had not prepared for Andrew asking the right question in front of other people. I turned to him. 2 months before your father passed, Madison called Helen's office and asked whether a widow's right to occupy property could be challenged. She also asked what would happen if an untransferred property was not claimed quickly. Andrew's face changed, not dramatically, not all at once. It changed the way daylight leaves a room when a cloud covers the sun. "Madison," he said. She gave a small laugh, sharp around the edges. "That is being taken completely out of context." "What was the context?" I asked. She looked at me then, and for the first time all evening, the softness fell away. There she was. Not the caring daughter-in-law. Not the organizer of healthy transitions. Just a woman who had believed an old widow would be easy to move aside. I was trying to understand the estate, she said. For Andrew. I did not ask you to do that, Andrew said. His voice was low. Madison turned on him with a wounded look, but it did not work as well with the deed in his hand. You were overwhelmed, she said. Someone had to think about our future. Our future. I looked around my dining room, at the people who had eaten my food and accepted my silence, and I realized Madison had finally said the honest thing. My grief had been an obstacle to their future. My home had been square footage. My marriage had been paperwork. My age had been leverage. I reached for the little plastic keychain she had given me and placed it beside the trust documents. The tiny blue house looked ridiculous next to the legal pages. That was the point. You gave me a house I could hold in my hand, I said. Charles gave me one I could stand inside. Madison's lips parted, but no answer came. Andrew covered his eyes with one hand. The guests sat frozen in the polite horror of people realizing they had been invited to witness cruelty and had stayed for cobbler. I stood slowly, smoothing my dress. The Lakeview house is not yours to sell, borrow against, decorate, occupy, or discuss with anyone without me. The old house will be handled according to the estate, through Helen Parker, not through dinner table speeches. Madison whispered my name, but it sounded different now. Smaller. I picked up the envelope, removed the copies meant for Andrew, and left the originals in my purse. This is your copy, I said. Read it carefully. It is the first thing in this house tonight that was prepared for my benefit. Andrew stood with the papers in his hand, but for once he did not look to Madison first. He looked at me. That was the saddest victory of my life, because it should not have taken legal language, a room full of witnesses, and his wife's exposed ambition for my son to remember where my face was. Mom, he said, and the word came out rough, almost unfamiliar. Madison reached for his sleeve. Andrew, do not let her make this into something ugly. He pulled his arm away. Not sharply. Not dramatically. Just enough. Madison noticed. Everyone noticed. I noticed most of all. Did you call Dad's lawyer? He asked her. Madison's eyes filled quickly, the way they always did when she needed softness to cover calculation. I was trying to help us, she said. You were grieving. Your mother was grieving. Somebody had to think clearly. About taking her house. His voice stayed quiet, but the room heard it. Madison looked around the table, finally understanding that an audience can turn into a mirror. That is not fair, she said. I never said take. No, I said. You said transition. You said realistic. You said healthy. You chose prettier words. She turned toward me with a trembling smile. Eleanor, I know you are upset, but this has all been a misunderstanding. I picked up the little plastic keychain and placed it in the center of my empty dessert plate. The tiny blue house sat there under the chandelier, cheerful and useless. A misunderstanding does not come in a gift box, I said. No one spoke. The clock in the hallway ticked in the silence, each second landing with the weight of something final. Andrew lowered himself back into his chair. Mom, I am sorry. I had waited weeks to hear those words. I had imagined they would warm me. Instead, they passed through the room like a match struck in a cold barn, small and late. I believe you are, I said. His face tightened. He wanted more from me. Absolution, perhaps. The old habit of mothers, smoothing the tablecloth after everyone else spills. I had done that for too many years. But being sorry after someone else shows you the truth is not the same as standing up while it is happening. He looked down. Madison whispered, Andrew. He did not answer her. That was not enough to repair what had been done, but it was the first honest thing he had given me all evening. I pushed my chair back and stood. Marlene immediately began gathering plates, as if chores could rescue her from shame. "Leave them," I said gently. She froze. "I will not be cleaning up after this one." The words surprised even me. Not because they were cruel. Because they were clean. I went to the hallway closet and took out my wool coat, the camel-colored one Charles bought me for our 30th anniversary. My overnight bag was already by the door. I had packed it before dinner: 2 sweaters, my medications, my reading glasses, Charles's pocket watch, the wedding album, and the keys to Lakeview. The rest could follow. Or not. A lifetime looks enormous when other people are trying to take it from you. It becomes lighter when you decide what is truly yours. Andrew followed me into the hallway. "Where are you going tonight?" he asked. "To a hotel in Toledo," I said. "Tomorrow morning, I am driving to Michigan." "By yourself?" There it was again, the old assumption dressed as concern. "I have been doing many things by myself lately." He absorbed that without defending himself. "Good." Madison appeared behind him, pale and stiff. "You cannot just leave like this." I turned to her. "That is exactly what you asked me to do." Her mouth opened, then closed. For once, the perfect sentence did not arrive. I took the plastic keychain from my plate and held it out to her. She stared at it. "Keep it," I said. "You were right about one thing, Madison. A house is something you can hold. A home is something you earn." She did not take it, so I set it on the hallway table, the real one Charles had built, which Andrew had quietly brought back from the garage while everyone sat in stunned silence. I noticed. I did not thank him. Not yet. Outside, the Ohio evening had turned cool, and the porch light cast a soft circle over the front steps. I paused at the door and looked back once. The dining room glowed behind them, beautiful and hollow. Charles's chair was still at the head of the table. Empty, yes. But no longer powerless. I walked to my car with my bag in one hand and the Lakeview keys in the other. No one stopped me. No one had that right anymore. The next morning, I reached the house just after 10. It was smaller than I expected: white siding, green shutters, a screened porch, and 2 cardinals moving through the cottonwood branches like little red sparks. From the kitchen window, if I stood just where Charles said, I could see the water. I unlocked the door, stepped inside, and breathed in dust, wood, and quiet. For the first time in weeks, the quiet did not feel like abandonment. It felt like space. I set Charles's pocket watch on the kitchen counter and opened the curtains. Sunlight spilled across the floorboards. I did not cry. I did not celebrate. I simply stood there, an old woman in a new home, finally understanding the difference between being moved out and walking away.